Welcome back, Global War in 1939. We are moving on within our in-depth look series at each nation. Today we'll be taking a look at the USA and the KMT. You kind of put these two nations together. Typically, if you're playing on the Ally side as the US player, you'll more likely also take control of the KMT. Not necessarily so, but usually that's how the teams get divided. So for the political situation, let's take a look at KMT first. The political situation is very similar for the KMT as it is for the communist Chinese player. The KMT does start the game at war with Japan. So you know you're in a conflict right away as soon as the game starts. You're one of few nations to actually start the game already at war. Most other nations start at peace, which is, kind of unfortunate, but you know who your enemy is right away. And for the Chinese point of view, you'll be fighting the Japanese essentially the entire game. If you end up fighting the Germans, things are going terribly wrong for the Allies. So you should be only focusing on the Japanese. Now, just like the communist China is they're not at war with the communist China. They're in like a Cold War state. So meaning you can't fight each other. So communist China won't fight each other. They're technically fighting on the same side against the Japanese. However, they are in a Cold War state. So their units can occupy the same territory as, say, other allied nations can. So the British and the Americans and the Australians can, of course, share the same space, and they'll defend together the same territory. But the communist China and the KMT cannot be in the same space as each other. So as you're maneuvering your forces around, you just want to be mindful of that. So if you have, for example, KMT forces move into Seshi, then that denies reinforcements from the communist China because they can't occupy the same territory. So you just want to be mindful as you're moving forces around. And just like the communist China, if, say, Japan takes this territory out, then the KMT can counterattack it, liberate it, but the territory won't go back to the communist China. It'll be awarded to the KMT. So both KMT and communist China, and we cover that in our communist video, that they can take each other's territory if it's originally owned by the Japanese, and you're doing a counterattack, right? So that's a way to increase your economic base, but you're making the other Chinese faction weaker by doing a maneuver like that. And just like the communist China, there is movement restrictions, like places on the map that the Chinese can't go, but there's certainly places that they can. So the places that, of course, they can go into the entirety of China. They can go in any of those territories. That would include all these Japanese territories. Hong Kong is definitely a territory you can go into. And the territories outside of China that they can go to would be Southeast Asia, which would consist of Burma, French Indochina, Saigon, Singapore, and Siam. So they can go in all these territories here. So that's a pretty decent amount of movement. They can't go into Bangladesh or Calcutta. So if you're looking to get Chinese infantry to reinforce Calcutta, you can't do that. The furthest west you can go would be Burma. But all these territories are up for grabs, which is good because then you could bring the FEC to Burma, bring the Chinese down for that added defense, because as the KMT player, you'll be mostly dealing with infantry. Of course, you'll have other units on the map, but the bulk of your army will be infantry. So you want to put them in good positions of defense, as they are. Infantry is one of your best defensive units that you can have. They do certainly have a high die roll comparative to other units. So, which is good for you, because where you do have a lot of infantry for your defenses, and you'll be thinking like the first little bit of the game, like especially early game, you'll be entering that defensive posture almost immediately. And then, of course, if you see opportunities to attack, take advantage, of course. But for early game, probably to mid game, you'll be on a defensive aspect. And there's certainly, because you do have so much infantry, and just the way the map is laid out, there's a lot of different strategies and maneuvers that you can do to kind of bait the Japanese, and then you'll hit them on the counterattack. And that's kind of what you're looking for. You're not looking, and again, this is all early game, you're not looking to go on full-fledged offensive. You're trying to build up your army, build up your economic base, get more money for your side, and then kind of try to bait the Japanese to attack you, and then you're looking to exploit them on the counterattack. So think of in that terms for the first little bit until you become strong enough or the Japanese become weak enough that you can go on full-fledged offense, right? Now, just added to what their starting position, your starting income is actually $12. It's pretty high considering the type of nation that KMT is. So you can rest assured, like a common maneuver, you have an A gun and 4 infantry here. A common maneuver the Japanese will do is attack this territory right away. So you'll lose $1, you'd be left down to 11 because all your territories added up equals out to 12. So you'd be down to 11, which is unfortunate. But you can rest assured the 4 infantry that you lose in this battle, which you probably will, you'll be able to replace immediately, or you can buy other units, and that's totally up to yourself. But you can almost replace the starting units that you're going to lose here with your starting income, and then you'll obviously collect income at the end of your round like any other nation. Now, they are kind of unique in a way that you don't have factories. So most nations will produce new units inside their production facilities. Now, China, just like the Communist China, don't have production facilities. So the way they build their units or place units on the map is territories that they've owned from the beginning of your turn and the green territories, right? So say you own it, this territory here at the beginning of your turn. When it comes to place new units, then you can place them here or here or here or here, whatever, wherever. So it gives you more freedom to get units pretty much anywhere you want in your country for that added defense. And that ability to really pop up infantry anywhere you want to a degree really hampers the Japanese and really slows down their advancement. So it's, again, for example, say you got 1 infantry here and 5 here. Japan comes down with a sizable army, captures this territory, and now you're looking at the map and you're like, oh man, my counterattack is only like 4 or 5 infantry. Well, if you hold off a turn, let them keep this, now all of a sudden you plop down, a whole, another groupment of infantry, and now all of a sudden you have 8. Where so now that counterattack's back on the table, unlike other nations where they have to build in their production facilities and then maneuver their units around and get in position. You can essentially get in position immediately, which is a great ability. So take advantage of that, and it'll definitely aid you very well. Now, when it comes to other units that they have access to, like the America can lend lease equipment, you can build artillery depending on the state of the board. But all that heavier equipment, like the artillery, has to be built in Szechuan. So it's not like you can build artillery on the front lines. You can only do that with your infantry, but your artillery would have to be built here. And we'll get more on that in a second. Now, when it comes to your national objectives, so this is a way to increase money. They actually have a really good one. They get +5 if the Burma Road is open. So meaning that Calcutta, West Bengal, Bangladesh, Burma, Sichuan has to be under Allied control. Now, if you're thinking, oh man, that's a lot of territories to cover off, well, you have a wall, multiple walls of infantry here, so you can rest assured that Sichuan is going to be under your control for a good while, unless the Japanese are going like all out, full-fledged into China, building up their army. But if they do that, they're kind of ignoring their navy, so which is a good thing for the Allies. So, but I really want to worry about Sichuan falling under Japanese control, anytime soon. So you can rest assured that this territory is covered. These three should be covered behind a wall of Burma. This should be your, defensive territory. Now, Japan, they can maneuver to take this early. And if that's the case, then you lose your $5 bonus. But you want to keep this open as long as possible. And you can get Chinese infantry here to help defend it, the bordering territory. But you do get +5. And if all these territories are under Allied control, this will also open up your ability to purchase artillery and AA guns. If the Burma Road is ever closed, meaning Japan owns any of these 5 territories, they don't need to own all of them. They just need to own one of them. But the Allies need to own all 5. You'll lose your ability to build artillery, which for China, your artillery is one of your main offensive weapons. So you want... I wouldn't focus only on artillery. Your main weapon is your infantry, but you do need a fair amount of artillery to exploit the Japanese if you want to go on a counterattack. Because going on an attack with only infantry, well, that's going to be a rough battle for you. But if you can supplement your army with a good number of artillery, not a bad idea to get up to 5, maybe even more if you can afford it. But your infantry should be your focus early for the defense, and then you'll switch to an offensive after the fact. So that's it for your national objectives. You only get 1, but it's +5. And if you can add that to your original 12, it's a fair amount of money. You can, easily get down 5 infantry a turn if you manage your territories correctly. Now, again, if Japan goes on a steamroller and just focuses on China, especially early, then you're going to have a rough game. So a lot of this is dictated on your enemy's maneuvers. But China does start with a number of infantry. They can really slow down the Japanese. And China is a really good defensive country. If you like defensive warfare, this would be the country for you. Now, when it comes to their units, they have access to, your standard low-level infantry, artillery. You also get cavalry. They're pretty decent, and you actually start the game with a fair amount of cavalry. You start with 3, so they're more of your offensive weapons. They only defend at a 2, so you're not going to put them in positions to defend, but certainly on the attack, they attack at a 3. They do cost 4, but they have a movement of 2, so you can line them up, have a whatever defense here, and line them up here or here, so you can go on that counterattack. And attacking at a 3 for a cost of a 4, it's pretty decent. Of course, your artillery, your standard artillery, move of 1, cost of 4. You can only buy them if these territories are under your control. But they have an attack of 3, defense of 4, and of course they boost your infantry. So that's what you want. You want to pair them with your infantry to go on that offensive punch. You do have 1 fighter, which is the Flying Tiger unit. Now, you can't buy these. You get 1 in the beginning of the game. If you ever lose it as a casualty for whatever reason, it's it. That's it. It's gone. The restrictions on your fighter, you can only attack on land territories. So, meaning, say Japan had a lone transport here in the water, you can't use your fighter to attack the transport. You can only use it to attack land units. So that's your really only restriction. Outside of that, you can't replace it. But it does have attack and defense of 7. So that's definitely going to be used in your offensive punch. You can certainly put it on the front lines. I wouldn't. I would keep it behind. It does have a range of 4, and you do have a base here, so you can increase your movement up to 5. So you should place it here, and you can easily reach wherever, and then fly it back to safety. But you do want to protect it because you only have one. Same thing with your AA guns. They're very standard for defensive purposes only. Have a cost of 6. But again, they can only be purchased if the Burma Road is open. And you do start with 2, so I wouldn't really worry about buying more. You certainly can if you want. And now, the light tanks for China, standard stats, attack and defense of 4. So you're going to want them to pair them up with your cavalry to go on your offensive opportunities when they arise. But China cannot buy these. They have to be bought by the Americans, have to buy them for China, and they have to be placed here. And you're only allowed 3, so that's the cap that you're allowed to have. So it's not like the American can buy a tank every single turn until you're up to like a dozen. So you're capped at 3. But a light tank for China, supplemented by say like 15, 20 infantry, and you get a couple of these tanks. They're fantastic for you. I would highly recommend your first 3 turns as the U.S. is to buy China these tanks, and then from there you just focus on your own country. But certainly get these tanks on the map. Again, they can only be purchased by the U.S. player. So if you're obviously you're the Chinese player, you want U.S. to spend that $6 every turn for the first 3 turns. To get you those armor. But that's it for Communist China. Not really a lot to get into. They're certainly a defensive power early game, but they do make a fair amount of money, so you can produce, a fair amount of infantry, and it really caused the Japanese player a lot of issues early game, mid game. Unless they're really focusing on you. And there's a couple of incentives for Japan to completely wipe out China. They also have another ability, usually, so you can think of this technically as their capital, but they don't really have a capital. So let's assume that Japan takes all these green territories out, right? They're all under Japanese control, and KMT is effectively out of the game. Now, normally, when a capital falls, whatever income that you have in the bank to spend on your next turn would go to the conquering nation. Now, with the KMT, this doesn't work that way. You retain your income. You don't surrender it to the conquering nation. You don't surrender it to the bank. You hold on to it. Now, you can't spend it because technically you're no longer a country. You don't have any territories. Now, if you get liberated by, say, the FEC, Russia, US, whoever comes and starts liberating the territories for you, then you stand back up as a playable nation, and whatever money you had in the bank, you can spend and put down those units. So it's not like, say, all this is wiped out and you had $12 in the bank, or $8 or $5, whatever. And then your territories start getting liberated, then you can instantly on your turn use that money right away to build new units. So it's not like you're starting back at 0, and then you'll collect income like you normally would, right? With whatever territory they have, which would probably be small. But it is a good ability just to give you peace of mind that if you do get completely wiped out, there is a way back into the game. Certainly easier than other nations. Usually you lose your capital. For some countries, that's a death sentence. For other countries, it's not the end of the game. You can get back into it, and China is one of those examples. So just keep that in mind. If you do lose your capital, you don't lose your income, which is great. Okay, so now for the U.S. turn, or the U.S. player, U.S. is kind of unique in like their political situation is kind of similar to the Russians, meaning that they start the game and they're not at war. They're a neutral country. Now, there's multiple ways for them to enter the war, but they don't start the war yet. And the way their income works, very similar to the Russians, and we went over that on their turn. Their starting income is 20. So not really that big boom that you think anytime you think of the US in this game, where you think, oh, they got all kinds of money, they buy whatever they want when they want. Economically, they do start weaker, and that's to reflect the economy of the day. They're really focusing on other aspects and not necessarily their military, but that certainly gets increased really quickly as the game progresses. Now, part of their political situation is that they're very much a USA first, that they're not really going to venture out into the rest of the world. So you can certainly purchase units while you're not at war. You can maneuver your units to get prepped up because you know war is coming eventually. So you can maneuver your units around to get in a good position. So when you do go to the war, then you can strike more effectively. Now, there are a couple restrictions on where you can and can't go with your units. So it's not like you can maneuver anywhere you want on the map. There's certain places that you have to stick to. So your restrictions are with especially with your army units, you have to stay within US territory. So whatever territories you start with in the game, those are the territories your army units, so your infantry, your tanks, whatever, have to stay within those territories. So it's not like you're, pre-war, you can come up to Canada or come into Britain. You have to stay within your own borders, which is fine. Another restriction in your naval units have to stay within bordering American territories. So, C-Zone 25 is fine, 29, 49, they're all fine. But you can't bring a Navy out to C-Zone 27 or 28. You have to stay within, again, your own borders. So C-Zone 25 and 29 will be considered U.S. Oceans, right? U.S. waters. Same thing with Hawaii. You're only allowed in 110. Midway, you're allowed in that sea zone, but you can't come over in sea zone 124 off the coast of Japan. Again, you have to stay within your own borders until you are at war. Now, pre-war, there is a way for the naval movement to get lifted, and that is, so if Japan ever captures Calcutta or Sydney, so that's the capital of FEC, the capital of Australia. If Japan ever takes those territories, while the US is still at peace, so they're not at war yet, then the naval restrictions get lifted and you can go anywhere you want on the water. But the land restrictions will still stay in place. But if you see, typically if Japan is going to make that play, it'll be by turn 3. And usually, like the average time the America gets into the war is typically turn 5. I've seen it get pushed to turn 7. That would be very unfortunate for the Allies. But the average, you can expect at some point, usually a turn 5, and they'll be in the war. Because depending on what the Axis are doing, the U.S. will get certain bonuses to their income to join the war faster or slower. It really depends on what the Axis are doing. But a way to get your naval restrictions lifted is if Calcutta or Sydney falls. And that will kind of force Japan to kind of think, maybe is this a good idea or not? Do I really want a large American fleet coming towards me while they're not at war? Now, in the Pacific, America has a lot of islands. I really wouldn't worry about this if you were the Japanese player. America has a lot of islands in the Pacific. So their movement in the Pacific is not like really restricted to a degree. You do have a lot of movement as the American player. You got the Philippines, Guam, Wake, Johnson, Hawaii, Midway. Of course, you have off the coast of San Francisco. you know, so up in Alaska. So there's lots of sea zones that you can get to pre-war. Now, once you're at war, you can go anywhere you want. This is all pre-war. Now, and another part, this is more or less an ability, but part of your political situation is that you're very focusing on your economy as the U.S. You're trying to get over the Great Depression. So you're trying to stimulate your economy with goods for your population. And that is represented by the U.S. starts the game with 3 minor facilities, and you'll have 2 on the Atlantic, 1 in the Pacific. Now, as soon as you go to war, all 3 of them instantly get upgraded to major factories, which greatly increases your production. You go from producing a max of 9 units up to 30, and that is at no cost. It just instantaneously happens as soon as you're at war. And how you go to war, there's a couple different ways. Obviously, if you get outright attacked. So if usually that attack could come from the Japanese. Now, there could be situations where the European allies or Axis will trigger the U.S. into war. But typically, you can expect the attack to come from in the Pacific. And if you get attacked, that's instant war. And we went over this in the Japanese video. There's sea zones that Japanese are not allowed into. So if they end their movement off the coast of any American territory, which would include the Philippines, Guam, Hawaii, and so on, again, that is a declaration of war. That's how you want to get into the war, because your income will instantly jump to your wartime economy. You'll make a lot more money, and so that's one way to get into the war. Another way is through die rolls. So your economy is based very much like the Russians, how we went over on that video, is that you'll start with $20 as your starting income. You'll spend that, buy whatever you want, and then your income drops back to 0. Okay, and then you'll start rolling dice. You'll roll 2 d12s. And the result of that die will be your income for the next turn. So on turn 1, you get your 20, you spend it on whatever, and then when it comes time to collect income, you roll your dice. So in this example, we have $8. So then turn 2, the US will have $8 to spend. Do it again. So this example, turn 2, we'd end up with 23. Now this is a cumulative. So let's say we roll the 11 and the 12 on turn 1. Turn 2, then we roll another 11 and 3. That will be added to your income or the die roll that you did on the first turn. So it's a cumulative, and the mark that you're trying to get to is up to 80. And then as soon as you get to 80, then you can declare war on yourself. You're not waiting on the Axis to attack you. Now there's other ways to get increases to your economic base, and this is all actions based off the Axis player will trigger these increases. So, for example, when Germany and Italy attacks France, you'll get a +5. Now, that'll typically happen on turn 1. So, you can kind of think of, okay, well, at least I'm not going back to 0. I'll just start at 5 and then roll the dice and continue on. If Germany, Italy performs an amphibious attack against Britain, which would consist of London, Liverpool, Scotland, you'll get a +20. Now, again, all these are the U.S. is not at war. Once they go to war, this doesn't apply anymore. So if they try to make an attack or do sea line, you'll get a +20, which is a massive increase. And that's not attacking and winning that territory. That's just making the attempt to the attack. So that's really something to make the Axis think twice about attacking Britain. You're giving the Americans a lot of increase in their production. This would also include Canada and the island of Newfoundland and Labrador. So any of these territories here, if they make an attempt to attack by a landing craft, then you can add 20. If the European Axis attempt to make an attack down in South America, that will increase world tension, giving a plus 20 to the Axis. And another way for them to get more money is if the Japanese do their unprovoked or their sneak attack ability against the Commonwealth. So that would consist of FEC, ANZAC, Canada, South Africa, the Money Islands. If they do their sneak attack, they'll get another plus 20. And if Japan controls Calcutta or Sydney, they'll get another plus 20. So that's a lot. So you can see by the actions of the Axis, the Americans will get, increases of their economic base. Same thing with the Russians. If they attack the Russians, they get a plus 10. Now, all these are one time. So it's not like you attack one territory, get a plus 10, attack another territory, get a plus 10. That'd be crazy. It's as soon as you make the initial attack, then that's when all these increases will take effect. So you can see by the actions of the Axis, the Americans could potentially get into the war super fast. And depending on how you're rolling the dice. Like if you're rolling, 10s and 12s, and Japan does their sneak attack to take out Calcutta, you can effectively be in the war by turn 3, right? So, these things can happen really quickly. Just because, getting the 80 on a die roll seems hard. Well, France is going to get attacked. Russia's going to get attacked. At some point, FE or the Commonwealth is going to get attacked. So what's that? 35, right? Plus 35 right there. And that's if the Axis are provoking these or triggering these increases at the minimum, right? So that's 35. You're pretty much halfway there, right? And then as long as, you roll the dice once. So so with the 35 plus this, you're over 40. So, by turn 3, you're going to be halfway to joining the war anyways. And then you get a lucky break. You get a couple of good rolls. Roll up 2 12s or 2 10s, and, you can potentially be in the war pretty quick. Now, if any Axis nation directly attacks you, of course, you'll be in the war immediately. And just like the Russians, whatever your income value is, so let's assume you're at, say, 59. You collect a 59, and it's the Axis next turn, and they attack the Philippines. Well, then you instantly jump from the 59 up to the 80. Okay? So that's your base income. And of course, what other nations that you annex, say Brazil, for example, you'll collect the Brazilian income. If Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, Mexico, they're all nations that you can annex and bring onto your side. And of course, you'll get the income for that as well. So you can potentially get, close up to $90 before bonuses, which is one of the highest, if not the highest, economic base in the game, which is way it should be. America, their industry is off the charts, and they should be making the most. So you can easily get your income up pretty quickly. Another way that America will instantly join the war is if the Germans conduct Sea Lion and is able to capture London or Liverpool. America will instantly declare war on the European Axis. So Germany. So that's a way for them. And again, they'll instantly jump up. So there is a maneuver where the Germans can do Sea Lion almost right away. Turn 1, turn 2. If they make that attempt, you're giving America a big economic boost. Just by making the attempt of the attack, you'll give them a plus 20. And if you fail, you just gave them extra income every turn to be added to their die roll. But if you do attempt and succeed in capturing London, well, America will instantly join the war. So you want to think twice about that. And the Axis, they know they're going to go to war with America at some point, just the way the world tension works in the game. But they wanted to delay it as long as possible to make them the strongest before fighting the Americans. Because the Americans are certainly going to turn the tide on the Allied side very quickly. So the Axis do got to be careful to a degree. There's lots of ways for the American income to trigger off and get increased, right? Now, when it comes to America's special rules or rules that are only associated with them, they actually have a few. They have quite a bit, actually. So let's go over them. So one is called Caught Off Guard. It's actually a negative towards the U.S., so it's not something that you're going to benefit from. And it's when the Japanese, or if the Japanese decide to use their sneak attack against your navy. You do start with a sizable navy in the Pacific, around Hawaii and San Francisco. And of course, you can certainly add to it as the turns go on. But if they do use their sneak attack against you, on every defensive rolls that you would make in that battle, you would get a -2 on your ships. So, yeah, so this is kind of not, it's a negative ability, but just keep in mind, if they use their sneak attack, then you'll get a -2 on your ships only for the duration of that battle. So you're probably not going to win. And when you're looking at the -2, you cannot fall below 1. So subs, for example, they defend at a 2. It's not like they'll go to 0. The most they'll ever get reduced to is rolling at a 1 out of a 12. But all your battleships, cruisers, and the like will all get their -2. For benefits, or special rules that benefit you, this is called Call to Arms. If the U.S. is victim to a Japanese sneak attack following a day of infantry. Okay, so basically what the call to arms is, if, again, depending on the Japanese, if they do the sneak attack against you, it's kind of like a rallying cry, and we've seen it in real life. Once Pearl Harbor happened, a massive swath of the American population joined the army voluntarily. So in this regard, your infantry for that round only are reduced to 2 as opposed to 3. So you get a bit of a discount. So it's a way to pump out a bunch of infantry for cheap, right? So take advantage of that ability. All right, so their next special rule is called Defending the Homeland. So if the Japanese player ever manages to capture a territory belonging to the U.S. in the North American continent, so this being on the Japanese side, it'll probably come from the Pacific. So we're looking at territories like Alaska, San Francisco, Western United States, Southwest, those territories. Panama would also be included in this scenario. Every other American territory that you own, which is quite a bit. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here, 1 here. You got a bunch over on the Pacific. So for every territory that's still under your control after the Japanese attempt or do make a landing, you'll get 1 infantry will pop up in every territory. So that's a lot. Certainly makes your defenses a little easier, because for the U.S., you'll tend to see a big chunk of your money will go into your navy, just being how far away you are, and no matter which direction you go, you're going to have to cross an ocean, so you need a navy, and then you'll start building up your infantry. But if they do make a landing, you'll certainly get a big influx of infantry at no cost. So take advantage of that rule. You also get Liberty ships. So basically, once you're in war, you'll get a $1 discount on your transports. Normally, they cost 7, but once you're at war, they'll only cost you 6. So you'll typically see people people probably won't be buying transports pre-war, and they'll save up, a bit of money every turn, and then once they're at war, then they'll dump down, 20 transports all at once. That's a good way to save a little bit of cash, if you wanted to do it that way. They also have the transcontinental rail network, similar to Canada's ability, where they can transport units from coast to coast, all in one movement instead of having to wait multiple turns. So the U.S. can rail up to 4 Allied ground units, up to 4 spaces per round, any direction within the homeland of the U.S. territory. So what they mean by that, homeland would be Washington to San Francisco, New England to Western United States. I don't believe it includes Alaska. So it's from the Atlantic coastline of the United States to the Pacific coastline. You can move up to 4 units per turn, up to 4 spaces. So it's just a way to get units around quicker. So especially early game, because you still only have the minor factories. What you can do, because you only have 1 minor factory over in San Francisco. So then you can, say, build 3 naval units and then build 3 army units, put the army units here, and then rail them over on the following turn. So it's a way to get army units on the map without having to take up space from your factory over in the Pacific. So you can still opt to build your navy pre-war. And of course, you can always do that when you're at war, when you have the major factories as well. You'll just have a higher production cap. That's all. All right, so another really good ability that America gets is Lend-Lease. Basically, what this is, you can give money to other allied nations. Now, there is a risk involved. There's a die roll because the Germans have the potential of taking that money. But it's on a D6, so it's not that big a deal. Well, it can be, actually. So the way the die rolls work, so any amount, so the way this actually works is, and it has to be done during the purchase new units phase. So during the purchase new units phase, U.S. can select and attempt to lend lease money to the UK and Russia. Now, the caveat is Russia and the UK need to be at war to be able to receive the lend lease money. The UK, you're not going to worry about because they're going to be at war essentially turn 1. And then Russia, there's a bit of a waiting game. Typically, you'll see Russia enter around typically turn 4. Again, depending on your play, but you can, kind of guess. Turn 4, they expect it to be in the war. So that's when you start lend leasing. Now, you can give up to $20 per turn, and you can divide that up, give it all to one nation, divide it up between multiple nations. That's up to yourself. Now, there is a die roll. So, say, just for an example, US is going to give UK 20 IPP. You roll a D6. So, on a roll of 1, half of the IPPs are captured by the Germans. So, if you're attempting to give away 20, well, the Germans would take 10. Now, what this is supposed to represent is the naval blockades in the Atlantic by the Axis, and they sunk multitude of ships and a lot of material and supplies that the British and other nations were relying on ended up in the bottom of the ocean or outright captured. So this is kind of simulating that. So on a roll, Germany captures half. On a roll of 2, all the IPPs are lost and returned to the bank. So no one benefits from them, which is fine by the Axis, because that's $20 extra not being spent to stop them. On a roll of 2 or 3, half the IPPs are transferred safely, and the other half is lost and returned to the bank. So if you're attempting to do 20, at least half is getting to its destination, and the other half will go to the bank. So it's not the greatest, but also not the worst. And a 5 or 6, all money is transferred safely. So if you roll a 5 or 6 and you're attempting to give away $20 to UK, then they get them all. But on a roll of a 1, That's the worst case scenario, where the Axis actually will collect the income and they can spend it against you. That's the worst case scenario. A roll of 2, that's not a good situation either, so you want to try to avoid that. Roll 3 or 4, getting half the income, not too bad, could be worse. And then, of course, 5 or 6, all of it transfers safely, best kind. So it's a great ability to transfer resources around, and to give more money to the UK. So just say, turn 1, the UK Navy gets completely obliterated in the Atlantic. As the game goes on, the British are struggling to build up their navy, build up their army to fight off the Italians in Africa and do other things around the map. This is a way the U.S. can help out directly. But now, of course, once the U.S. gives up that $20, then they don't have it. So if they collect 100, now they're down to 80, right? So you're actually giving the cash away. But there is a slight risk, so just be aware of that. Another ability that they get is called Seabees Airbase, which is... This is a pretty cool ability, actually. It allows... This is more prevalent in the Pacific because of all the different islands that are in that region. You probably won't see this much in the Atlantic, but definitely the Pacific is where you want this. So the way this actually works is the U.S. has 1 opportunity per turn and may purchase 1 Seabees Airbase for a cost of 5 IPP during the purchase new units phase. So you have to buy it then. So it's not like you can buy it anytime you want. It has to be in the new purchase new units phase. The U.S. immediately declare their intent and location of usage, which can be one of the following: repair all damage to an existing airbase under U.S. control, occurs immediately, or build a new airbase and place during the place units phase. Another option is for the U.S. to place a new airbase or take control of an existing airbase on a territory that is currently under enemy control. If the attack is successful for the desired territory, all damage to the airbase is immediately removed. Additionally, this would prompt the U.S. to subsequently land a total of 3 aircraft on the newly placed or captured territory with an airbase. So basically what all that is saying is, say over here, we'll just use this Carolina Islands just for an example. So if the Americans were planning on attack, they would obviously plan out your turn, you plan out your purchases, you build one of these Seabees air bases, and you say, okay, I'm going to use it on Carolina Islands. So then you can't change your mind and use it somewhere else. It would have to be in that territory. But you would plan all this out ahead of time. You bring down your navy, your transports, conduct your landing, you take over the territory. Normally, your fighters would have to have legal landing spots somewhere else. But so Guam would probably be your closest, but this will probably be under Japanese control. And say your fighters coming from Hawaii usually has like a movement of 4 or 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or if they had a movement or 6 or something. But either way, the fighters don't have nowhere to land, so you can't bring your planes down to help out in that attack. This way, you could purchase an airbase, and 3 of your fighters can, making this, even though you just captured it, then they can land fighters on territories that they just captured. So definitely a really good ability, excellent ability, and you can, use the enemy's air bases against them. So definitely really strong ability, because otherwise there'd be many times where you're trying to plan out your attacks and you're just like, I just need 1 extra fighter or 3 extra fighters or whatever, just to guarantee the victory. Otherwise it could be a dicey battle, and I might lose. But this way is to get extra units into a region that normally would not be possible just for movement restrictions, right? So definitely a really cool ability. Use it. Certainly, benefit you in escalating the war in the Pacific. This is where you get the most use out of it, just because of all these different islands. But yeah, no, definitely a really cool ability. So that's it for their special abilities. One is kind of a negative. The rest will aid you in executing the war. They actually have some of the most abilities in the game. Now, they're national objectives, so they're bonus income. They actually have two, and they're sizable. One's for 20, the other's for 25. So how these work, so your natural income is actually 80. So if you take all your territories, add it all up, it comes out to be 80. And there's ways annex Brazil will increase that number, of course. But you'll get plus 20 if the U.S. controls Washington, New England, and San Francisco while at war. Well, you're going to get that, right? So Washington, New England, San Francisco, you're probably not going to lose these. I wouldn't stress about losing these at all, but you do have to be at war to benefit from this 20 extra dollars. So that will increase you up to 100 that you're collecting every turn. And, you know, for the next competitor to get to 100 would be the Germans, and they need to put in a lot of work and conduct a lot of battles to get up that high, where the German or the Americans essentially start at 100 because of that $20 bonus. Now they also get a $25 bonus. Now this is an if national objectives. This is completely under your control, and it's one of those objectives that is either on or off, meaning you just because you collected the last turn, it doesn't mean you're going to collect it the following turn or the turn after that, but the next turn you may. Now, if I'm playing the Americans, I'm ensuring that I'm following this guideline to ensure that I get this 25 every turn. So you get plus 25 if the U.S. produces a minimum of 40 IPP worth of units per west and eastern of the U.S. So you collect 80 from your territories. You collect another 20 because of your national objective. You collect another 4 once you annex Brazil. Now, you'll probably lose 3 to Guam and Philippines. So you'll be up to 101, really. And then you can collect potentially up to another 25. If that 100 or so dollars, if 40 of it gets spent in the Pacific, which is not difficult, and the other 40 gets spent in the Atlantic. So you're kind of splitting your income, and if you spend at least $40 here on this side of the map, and then another 40 on the other side, you collect an additional 25. But you can see, like, just assume you're like, and you'll get this cash on the collect income phase if the $40 is spent on both ends of the map. So if that's true, you're good to go. But you have an option. You could be like, oh, I need all 100 in the Pacific because I'm conducting an operation and I need those extra 2 battleships and I can't really spend them on this side. Then of course you're not going to collect it. But to build up to 40 on this side, you know, it's not very hard. You can, especially the higher cost units, and that would go for anything. So even if your intent is to still bring them into the Pacific, as long as they're built on the side, you're good to go. So say you build a couple of infantry and 3 bombers, and you put them in Washington and then fly them over to the Pacific side. Well, it still counts. It's still $40 in this region. You know, so there's ways around it if you want 100% of your income to be in the Pacific, or on the flip side, 100% of your income to be in the Atlantic. You just produce them on the other end of the map and then move them into position on following turns, if that is your desire. Or you can just take on both the European axis and Japan all at the same time, split your income, spend 50 in each spot, you'll get an extra $25. So an extra $25, that's almost an aircraft carrier and a fighter. Not 2 fighters, but almost. Aircraft carrier 16, fighter for 10. So, it's almost an aircraft carrier and a fighter every single turn that you would otherwise not have. So that's a pretty big deal. $25 is nothing to, you know. So that would increase your money. You'll collect 80, collect the 20, and then another 20. You'd be collecting 125 a turn, plus any extra things that you may annex, right? So, pretty good abilities, good ways to make money. America is definitely a force in this game. It's just that they start the game not at war, so it takes them a little bit of time to get into it. And but once you are, you'll definitely be able to turn the tide for the Allies if played correctly. Now, if you're not utilizing this nation to its potential and its full use, then you're probably going to have a hard time. But the intent of the U.S. is to get into the war and turn the tide against the Axis, so the Allies can win. All right, so let's get into their build queue. So their build queue for their facilities is essentially the same as the British. So they still get, their major factories, minor factories, build 10 units, build 3, build your capital ships and repair it from your major factories. Now, the U.S. does have one more ability that we kind of skipped over. They're the only nation that can build capital ships from minor facilities. Okay, so they can every country needs a battleship, and of course they also have military bases. Now they start the game with a military base. Another good location would be the Hawaiian Islands, even though it's kind of easy to, because it's pretty close to the mainland U.S. continental U.S. To get a transport down with a couple units is easy, but that would be another good location just to be able to produce there right away. And then, of course, once you annex Brazil, it'd be another good spot. But you're only allowed to have 3, and you start with 1 in the Philippines. So it's another production facility, allows you to build 1 infantry, and they get AA guns like every other nation. They're a defensive structure, and they get the standard air base, naval base. They just add +1 to your movements for each type of unit, and the naval bases allow you to repair. They also get fortifications, purely a defensive structure. Increases all your infantry up to 10, +1 on the opening round of attack, and you get your radar tower similar to the British. Now, the best location for that would be the Hawaiian Islands. You put 4 fighters there, get a radar tower, get an air base, and then if the Japanese ever do attack your Navy station on the sea zone, at least that way you can get 4 extra fighters for your added defense, which may persuade the Japanese to holding off that attack, right? So that's a really good location. But their structures overall, there's no unique ones. They're all standard, very similar to the British. For their Army and Air Force down here, so their Army units, they get their standard infantry, cost of 3, attack of 2, movement of 4, can be boosted by artillery. You can buy as many as you want. Their specialized infantry, which is Marines, again, cost of 3. You can only build 2 per turn, but there's no unlock wait, so you can start building them on turn 1 if you want, but you only get 2 per turn. So with the same cost as regular infantry, if you're going to build a stack infantry, make sure 2 are at least Marines. The attack and defense is the same as regular infantry. However, they get a +1 on amphibious attacks. So the Marines, they're pretty decent if you're going to go after France and conduct D-Day, because you'll get a +1 on the opening round. But from there onward in France and Europe, they act like regular infantry. The best bang for your buck for this particular unit would be in the Pacific, because there are so many islands. So you just get the +1 every time you make a new attack against a new island, right? So that's where you're better off deploying them. You get your airborne. So it's your... most nations have airborne. Standard attack of 3, defense of 5. They don't become unlocked till round 5, so there's slightly a bit of a waiting. But round 5, you're typically in the war by that time anyways. And then you can pump out a bunch of these at once. You are limited to 4. which is quite high comparative to other nations. Most nations, they can only get 2 or 3. The Americans can get 4. And a great unit, especially on defense. A defensive 5 for an infantry class unit is fantastic. They get cavalry like anyone else. Limit of 3, attack of 3, defense of 2, movement of 2. They get their mechs just like any other infantry. No unlock turn. You can buy them right away. Self-propelled artillery. Again, they are 2 dice at 2 for attack and defense. But you gotta wait till round 4 to get them, and you're limited to only 3. So that's all pretty standard, nothing fancy there. Artillery, same as any other nation. You got your heavy artillery, cost of 6, 2 dice at 4s, limited 3. So, you know, it all depends on where you want to deploy them, how you want to use them. But a fantastic unit, definitely get it out as soon as it becomes unlocked. Artillery. So, and then when it comes to your tanks, they actually have a good number of tanks. So they have the standard light tank, attack and defense of 4, cost of 5, so pretty cheap comparative to other countries. Sherman tank, cost of 6, so this is your medium tank, and you get an added +2 compared to the light tank, so defend and attack at 6. And all tanks, like any other nation, can be paired with tactical bombers to get a +1 on your attacks. And then you got your heavy tank, cost 7. So unlike other nations, the British costs don't actually go up. You're just limited to what you can get. But this one, the light tank, medium tank, buy as many as you want. There's no unlock turn. The heavy tank costs 7, but it has attack and defense of 8. So your 3rd level tank has a +2 on your medium tank, which is wild. But round 10 unlock, limited to 3. So there's a bit of a waiting game here. And then you got your tank destroyers. Buy as many as you want. You gotta wait till round 8 to unlock them. Defense of 4, so the defense is not that great. But they have attack of 7. So, and for a cost of 6 on an attack value of 7, that's pretty decent actually. You just want to make sure they're in positions where you're going to be attacking and not a lot of defending, as their defense is not that great comparative. And then you got your fighter classes. So you got your standard fighter, cost 10, attack and defense of 6, movement of 4, and all their fighters, there's no unlocks, and you buy as many as you want, so you're not restricted in that. You got your naval fighter, cost 11. Their stats are the same as a regular fighter, but you do get target selectability on your naval fighters. So I would recommend put these on your aircraft carriers, and then your normal fighters can be on the land if you want. But the naval fighters are a fantastic unit on your aircraft carriers because of that target select. So if you do manage to land a hit on it, you pick your target and not your enemy. So obviously you're going to go after the more expensive battleships, cruisers, so you don't have to, trudge against the destroyers and subs before you get the more expensive unit. So definitely a good unit to get. You got your torpedo bomber, cost of 12, a defense of 5. That's pretty decent. It's out of all your fighters, it's the worst defensive, but 5 ain't too bad. But it has attack of 7, which is great, right? But pretty expensive, cost of 12, comparative to a normal fighter. Then you got your tactical bomber, same stats as the torpedo bomber, just $1 less at 11, and your movement is 5. So your tactical bombers for the US are actually really, really good. They got that extra movement of 5, so that's pretty decent. Medium bombers, same as any other nation, cost 12, movement of 6, 2 dice at 4 for attack. And then you got your Flying Fortress heavy bombers, which is, the Americans are, I believe they're the only nation that don't have to wait for an unlock for your heavy bombers. You can start buying them right away. Cost 14, 3 dice at 4 on the attack. That's amazing. Like, buy these. And then you have your highest level of bomber, which is a super fortress. Cost 18. Wow, that is really expensive. But you get a movement of 8, which is definitely the longest ranged aircraft in the game. And of course, you pair that with your airbase, so you get a +1 on your movement. That's wild. There is a round 10 unlock, and you're limited to only 3. So it's a bit of a waiting game to get these out. But you get 4 dice at 4. Can you imagine? One unit has the potential to land 4 hits against your enemy. That is wild. So definitely buy all 3 of them when or if you can, and you pair all 3 together in one battle. That's devastating, but very expensive. 18. So definitely deploy them where they're going to be most effective if you are going to buy them. Air transport, move them a 5. Cost 6, no attack or defense. You can have up to 4 on the map, so that's pretty decent. But there's a turn 5 unlock, which is, you'll probably be in the game by then anyways, by turn 5. Then you got your naval units, which are up here. They do got a couple of unique ones. They got a couple of ones that you can't buy, but you can inherit depending on how you annex different nations. So we'll get into that. Aircraft carrier, standard, cost 16. Attack and defense of 4, but only at aircraft. Escort carriers is the cheaper version of the regular aircraft carrier. Can hold 1 fighter. Cost of 9, so that's where you get your discount. But your attack of 1, defense of 2. So yeah, you're paying less, but your combat effectiveness is in half comparative to the normal aircraft carrier. And the regular aircraft carrier is considered a capital ship, so it's harder to kill. You got your battleships. Cost 18, attack and defense of 8. Buy as many as you want. Cruisers, cost of 11, attack and defense of 6. Destroyers, cost and defense of 4, cost of 7. And then you also get, just like the British, you get sub chasers. Cost of 4, so super cheap ship, easy to get out, doesn't cost a lot. Attack of 2, defense of 3, so you get what you pay for. Unlock around 3, and you can buy up to 3 of them, but it's a great way to detect subs outside of your destroyers. So just another anti-sub weapon, but certainly really cheap and really, just a shield for your heavier units. So obviously you're going to take your hits on that first. You also have torpedo boat. Now you can't buy these. You start the game with them. Attack of 3, defense of 2, movement of 2. So you start the game with a few of them, 3, but you can't replace them once they're gone. They're gone. But they're not, their attack and defense is not the greatest. So you're probably going to take hits on these first, and then they'll be out of the game. You get your standard sub, standard transport, and pre-war the transports cost 7, and then once you're at war they get reduced to a 6. And then you also get attack transports, which is your unique ship. Turn 5 unlock, you can only buy 1 per turn, but you can have as many as you want, but you can only get 1 out every turn. Same cost as regular transports, but they have an attack value. But they also get a defense value, just like regular transports. So it's pretty decent. You get a transport that can assist in the attack phase, so that's pretty decent. And then you got your coastal sub and a coastal battleship. These are units that you can't buy, but if you annex, say, Brazil, then you'll get one. So essentially they're battleships, still 2 hits to kill. But their attack and defense is at 5, and if they take the hit, then their defenses and attacks are reduced to a 3. But again, a really good unit to absorb hits against your enemy, to save off your battleship and your more expensive units that you want to retain. Now, their battleship is actually unique. So up till round 9, all the American battleships are just like regular battleships. There's nothing fancy about them. They attack and defend at 8, has a bombardment of 6. However, once round 10 comes, then all battleships for the U.S. on the map are upgraded to an Iowa class battleship. It doesn't change their cost; they just get an upgrade. So their stats, instead of an 8, they get bumped up to a 9, and then their bombardment gets bumped up to a 7. They still absorb the same amount of hits. So if you get to round 10, then the American battleships become very devastating. And it's not a new unit that you're buying. All battleships that are existing on the map get that upgrade. So if you have, say, 3 battleships in the Pacific, say in the Philippines area conducting whatever, round 10 comes, all of them will get upgraded. So it's not a new unit you're buying. It's an upgrade to an existing unit. So that's where the battleship becomes unique for the Americans. It certainly becomes really stronger. And, rolling at a 9 on a D12, you can almost guarantee a hit every round. The percentage is vastly in your favor, right? And just get that one extra +1 compared to a regular battleship could make all the difference. So it's a pretty big deal. And of course, you got your sub chasers, another good unit for absorbing hits, detecting subs. So definitely use those, take advantage of them. But that's really it for the Americans and the Chinese. Your strategy for the Allies, the Axis are the early game. They're expanding, and it seemed like they're indestructible. But if you can keep the Russians in play, wait till the Americans show up, and use the combined effort of both the U.S. and the British together, kind of play them as one big massive army. They're all on the same side, and just the way the turn sequence goes, you can really do that can opener effect of one nation attacking and the other one following up on that attack, and it makes it really difficult for the Axis to go up against that pressure. But the Americans are definitely a strong force in this game, especially if you're utilizing all those bonuses. It's an extra $45. So some nations on the game don't even collect 45, let alone a 45 bonus. So they can definitely use that economic might to your advantage, and try to turn the tide. It really boils down to your choice. Do you go all in on the Pacific, all in on the Atlantic, or do you split it up and take on all 3 Axis nations at once? Now, of course, you're not doing it yourself. You have your other allies to help you out. Definitely, U.S. is a unique nation. You just have to have a little bit of patience with them. They're not a juggernaut right away, but they do quickly turn into one as the game progresses. And you can expect, like I mentioned before, the standard or the average time frame that they get into the war is turn 5, turn 6. You can, as the Axis player, can push it to turn 7, but I wouldn't expect anything past that. They'll definitely be in the war themselves. And if they ever reach 80 on their die rolls and the other bonuses they get, depending on what the Axis are doing on the map, you definitely have the potential of getting in like turn 3. And if you're playing a game where America's in the war turn 3, that's bad news for the Axis, and it's a really big boost for the Allies. And that's basically what you're trying to do. America's trying to get into the war as fast as possible, and the Axis are trying to deny them as long as possible. So definitely good country to play. You just have to have a little bit of patience early game. All right, well, that is it for the Americans and the KMT. Again, thank you for watching. Have yourself a great day.